Welcome to Leadership by the Glass, the podcast where we explore leadership through the lens of wine. Because leadership, like wine, is shaped by the context, character, and conditions around us. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Connolly, and each week we uncork a leadership idea, pair it with a wine, and talk about what it actually looks like to lead well and drink well in real life. So pour yourself something you enjoy, settle in, and let's get started. This week, I want to talk to you about a particular line I heard on another podcast that stopped me in my tracks. You know, every once in a while you hear something and it just resonates so deeply that you can't shake it off and you just ruminate and think about it. And that's what this was. Sometimes they're complicated ideas, sometimes they're simple. This one was just so clear to me. So let me set some context for you so you can understand why it mattered so much. I was listening to a podcast, SommTV's podcast. If you don't listen to it, I highly recommend it, especially if you like wine. But there are a lot of connections to other things. For example, I was able to make this connection with leadership. So I was listening to, I'll link the episode in the show notes, but I was listening to the podcast episode where they were talking about a very infamous dispute in Napa between two neighboring wineries, Stag's Leap Winery and Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. Yes, two different wineries. Basically the same name, the difference is an apostrophe. The conflict, I'll give you a little overview here, but honestly, it's if you've taken a business class, you've probably studied this from a trademark dispute lens. And if you like wine, you probably just know the story from the wine lens. I highly recommend you check that episode out. They'll get into the history of it, but just to give you a little context, the conflict between these two wineries centered around trademark rights and name recognition. Stag's Leap Wine Cellars was part of the Historic Judgment of Paris competition in 1976. And again, this could be another episode, so I won't get too far into the history of it. But in 1976, a British wine shop owner in Paris basically went to California, took a bunch of California wines, brought them over to France, and they did a blind tasting where they compared them against French wines. And French judges picked the California wines. California beat the French wines sort of on their own soil. And it became a huge, huge deal in the wine world. And it really placed Napa Valley on the global wine map. And really, for American wine, it's sort of what opened the door to us being part of this global wine conversation. So because Stag's Leap Wine Cellar had been part of this competition, they were one of the wines that were involved in it, they had had a lot of publicity and growth after that particular competition. Their neighboring winery was named Stag's Leap Winery, and so Stag's Leap Wine Cellar, of course, felt that this other winery was sort of benefiting from their reputation. It's a fascinating story, and again, there's like a whole legal battle. It's Warren Winiarski. There's a whole bunch of characters. I can't recommend it enough, but that's not what today is about for me. So maybe we can delve into it in another podcast. But there's these two neighboring wineries, and they're fighting with each other. What's the line that got me? As the podcast host is talking about the story, his guest on the podcast is Jonah Beer, who is the former vice president of Frog's Leap, different wine, Frog's Leap Winery. And he's talking about how after all of this, right, Napa becomes this sort of mecca, this sort of place for winemakers and people that want to make wine to go to move to work, to live in. And while that's amazing because we now have some of the best wine in the world coming out of Napa, it also means that you've got a lot of people moving there because it's trendy and it's the place to go, but not necessarily because they're in it for the right reasons. And so the line he said that I thought was so interesting, he's talking about these kind of upstart winemakers coming in. He said, when we think about Napa and wine and what they're producing, and to take it back even a little bit further, Napa has long had a sort of all boats rise mentality, going all the way back to Robert Mondavi, this idea that if the wineries are succeeding, they're succeeding together because it's creating this wine destination. And so he's talking about, again, people moving in. And he says, when we're thinking about people that are showing up to be part of this industry, but this could really apply to any industry, he says, you're here to be part of something, not to be something. And I know he's referring to like a winemaker's name on a bottle, but I just thought that was so profound and prophetic. And I stopped in my tracks. I was like, that statement applies to so much more than wine. And I thought about leadership, and like it applies to leadership. Leadership is full of tension. On the one hand, we spend years building our skills, gaining credentials, refining our expertise. We work to make something of ourselves. We move up, we earn titles, we earn accolades. But some of the most effective leadership is actually rooted in collective efficacy, shared purpose, shared ownership, shared success. All boats rise. And there's a paradox in there. And I think it goes back to that statement. Are you here? Do you want to just be something? Do you want to be somebody? Like, are you here for the name or are you here to do the work? And so when I look at this particular episode and that statement that came out of it, that apostrophe war is a metaphor for something deeper to me. When leadership becomes about protecting the name, taking credit for something, protecting the name rather than strengthening the whole, ego can creep in pretty quickly. And we can see that many leaders, when they're in it just to build their resume, just to put the feather in their cap, we see all kinds of shifts from being transformational in their leadership to actually just creating change for change's sake, and a whole host of other things that aren't always to the benefit of the teams that we lead. So for me, the big question this week is, what if leadership was less about being the name, right, getting the credit, and more about being part of the team? So what if instead of it being about Napa Valley and a particular winemaker or a particular winery, it's really about the region, and it's that all boats rise mentality. I think we can pull that out to our teams. And it's really hard because we're given mixed messages as leaders, right? We're told, be humble, elevate others, build community, get the credentials so that you can be an effective leader. We're rewarded for standing out. We're rewarded for differentiating ourselves, building a personal brand, and it gets really, really hard to not confuse visibility and value. And again, I keep going back to that quote. You're here to be part of something, not to be something. If we're talking about wine, great wines, the greats of the world, like these aren't things that happen in isolation. It's not one perfect grape. It's not just one winemaker. It's not just the soil. It's how it all comes together. It's how it all interacts. And in leadership research, this idea shows up over and over again. I'm thinking about Michael Fullan in particular here, whose work on transformational change and transformational leadership I often reference. And he reminds us that effective leaders create the conditions for others to thrive. They mobilize shared purpose. They focus on that purpose rather than just driving outcomes alone. And so then the impact ends up outshining the individual. So if you're leading a team and you're creating this culture of collective efficacy, your team is succeeding and you are doing great things. And it's that growth outshines you as the individual leader. Collective leadership, distributive leadership, it takes it further. Leadership isn't just a role that should be held by a few. It's a culture where many different people have and hold pieces of the vision. And the organization becomes stronger because the leadership is shared. Reflecting again on collective efficacy, if we go back to John Hattie's research, collective efficacy is identified as one of the most powerful influences on organizational performance. It's a shared belief that together we can accomplish difficult things. But that collective efficacy, that requires something really specific from leaders. It requires you to let go of your ego. It requires us to step back. It requires us to build that identity around we instead of me. And the big thing here, the big thing, it requires us to create systems that outlast our presence. In wine terms, it's a blend that creates brilliance. It's not one particular element. It's not the best equipment. It's not all of those things. It's the harmony of it all together. When leaders focus too heavily on making their mark, when their sole focus is their name and building their name, organizations simply become launching pads for them. Innovations arrive with them, innovations leave with them. The people left behind after they leave feel manipulated, they feel used, and frankly, they feel exhausted. We've all heard about initiative fatigue. So often initiative fatigue is linked to leaders coming in. They want to change so that they can say that they've made a change. They want to attach their name to that change and use that as a catapult to move to their next job, location, idea. And again, it just leaves the organizations that they're leaving behind not in a better place. And so when leaders can focus on building something bigger than themselves, the culture holds steady even if they leave, even if the leadership changes. A winery might change winemakers, and that is not to say that the winemaker doesn't have one of the most valuable, important parts in the process, that they aren't leaving their mark. They do. A winemaker leaves their mark on an individual vintage. But the vineyard, even if the winemaker leaves, the vineyard remains. And so did the winemaker work alongside the grape growers and the owners and all of those pieces to make sure that when they moved on, that vineyard is left in a better spot, and that they were also working with all of the other winemakers around them to build the region, to learn the best techniques, so that, again, that all boats rise mentality. So let's make this practical. Okay. In leadership, or if leadership, I should say, is about being part of something bigger than yourself, here's some questions that you could sit with to really ask, are you doing this? Because I think it's really easy for us to think, yes, I'm doing that. I'm leading my team to be better than me. I'm not trying to take credit for everything. I'm humble. But it's so hard again to balance that when we are explicitly told, like, you've got to put your name on things. You've got to build that resume. You've got to empower people. Well, how do you empower people without taking charge? How can you make it a collective effort? So here's some questions I have for you as you head into the week. Where are you focused on being the best? And is that focus strengthening the collective or separating you from it? Are you building systems that can function without you? Or do those systems depend on you? You might come into a space and you might revamp a team and build an incredibly efficient, important system. But if the key of that system is you, then you haven't done a good job building it. It has to function without you. What would it look like for you to contribute more intentionally to a shared vision? Have you even created a shared vision? Whose vision are you perpetuating? Is it your team's vision? Have they had an equal say and opportunity in it? When you succeed, does your team feel ownership in that success? Do they feel that that success is also their success? Sometimes our egos show up even when we don't want them to. It can look like we're protecting the credit. It can look like we're protecting our name. I think a lot of times it's about us wanting to feel indispensable, especially in such a volatile economic climate. We want to make sure that our contributions are known so that our value is known. But the leaders who are the leaders who are not the ones that have made themselves look irreplaceable, but rather built teams and systems that are irreplaceable, even if they are replaced, they're the ones that are creating confidence. They are showing their capability. They're creating connections, and they will thrive no matter where they are. And a good organization is going to recognize the importance of that and commend that much more than an individual's accomplishments. So what's in my glass this week? You would probably think that I would be doing something from Stag's Leap, but I'm not. Since Jonah Beer, the person who made that statement, really inspired me, I am drinking a Frog's Leap Cab this week. I had the opportunity to go out to their winery and to visit it. And it really struck me for a number of reasons, but it's one of my favorites. It's got that Rutherford dust, that classic example of it. I think it's really great that as a winery, they are known for dry farming and their organic practices. They're deeply committed to the land and to the broader Napa community, and they're deeply committed to creating this thing that is going to maybe even outlast them. So they're making the changes and adjustments to the land, to the techniques, to the farming. So it's not necessarily about the name on the bottle, but it's about this collective thing that they're doing. And I think that's really fitting in the context of our conversation. This particular Cabernet, again, has that Rutherford dust, which is one of my favorite things. To me anyway, it's earthy. I think it's very balanced. It just works together really harmoniously. It's a beautiful wine. Not one aspect of it dominates. You really can get all the different pieces of the wine. And so even though it's not a wine that's shouting really loud, you remember it. It has staying power and it's unforgettable without having to be at the forefront with their name. And that kind of feels like the leadership that we should be working towards. So it can be really easy to get caught up in achievement, recognition, titles, awards, reputation. But again, leadership that lasts, it's not about the name that's on it. It's about the collective efficacy you helped build. Bringing in your team, allowing them to be part of the decision making, allowing them to be part of the problem solving, and then ultimately sharing in the success when it happens. And so when we stop putting ourselves at the center, we make room for those bigger things other than ourselves. It doesn't have to always revolve around us. Again, a winery could change winemakers, and each vintage carries the imprint of those who cared for the grapes and those who made the wine. But the winery goes on because good systems have been put into place. So the most meaningful work that you do, it's not going to have your name attached to it, but it should have your heart attached to it. And that should be more than enough for you if you're really getting out there and you're being an effective, ethical, loving, caring leader. Put your heart in it, not your name on it, and really ask yourself, are you here just to make a name for yourself? Do you want to be something, or do you want to be part of something? I think there's room for both, but I definitely think it starts with being part of something. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone that you're building something with. And as always, until next time, pour into your potential. I hope this week you lead intentionally and drink well.